All right. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. Good morning to those of you on the West Coast. I'm your host, Brandon Troy, also co creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited. Thanks so much for joining us wherever you're watching from, whether it's live or after the fact. If you were taking a look at the title or you saw the promo from earlier, you know that you guys are in luck because we have a terrific guest on tap for you guys as we are, winding down to the last couple of days of 2023. But without further ado, I want to introduce our guests. Of course, they don't need any introduction, but I will just go down the list of how awesome our guest is that we have on tap. Of course, they are faceted, excuse me, not only as an editor, but also as a composer, having won multiple Saturn Awards for Best Music in The Usual Suspects and Superman Returns, a BAFTA Award for Best Editing for The Usual Suspects, multiple BMI Film and TV Awards for Best Music for X2, Fantastic Four, Valkyrie, Jack the John Slayer, and of course, in 2019, won an Oscar for Best Achievement in Film Editing for Bohemian Rhapsody. It is my pleasure to welcome back John Ottman. Bring him on now. John, hello. Welcome back, sir. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. It's
Good,
just
good, good.
too early, and so I'm got my espresso here, so hopefully I'll be coherent.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, as I said, winding down to the last couple of days of the year. It's crazy. It seemed like this year kind of like really sped by. I don't know how it was for you,
I'll just
but
wait till you get older. It's faster and faster. It's like the unit started. It's strange. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I mean, I figured, seeing that we only have a couple of days left of the year, I still wanted to, talk X2, of course, with you. With it, it's crazy to believe that it's been 20 years. That's it's it's really wild to believe that it's been 20 years. But I was like, even when we were scheduling this, I was like, we made it by a couple of days. I just made it by saying that it's 20 years and not more than 20 years. But be that as it may, I also wanted to, reason why I wanted to schedule this is just in lieu of where the landscape is in films right now, especially with, quote unquote, that genre of superhero films.
Mm,
And, thinking back of that time where it was a very much a very different landscape when it comes to superhero films. And I'm, thinking of the films that were around at that time. I mean, we had Blade, which I feel like doesn't really get enough credit of how,
yeah.
groundbreaking it is.
Yeah.
And then of course the first X-Men and even, the first Spider-Man as well. And then, having, X2. Can you talk a little bit about, that time and where the headspace was with working with studios at that time and working on, a superhero film at that time?
Well, I never read a comic book in my life, and so I didn't really know much about. I didn't know anything about X-Men, and except for watching the first X-Men film, which I wasn't involved with, which was the only film I didn't do with Brian Singer because I was off
And John,
directing.
I'm gonna pause you. I apologize. I'm gonna pause you for a second. It sounds like you're going in and out. I just wanted to make
Oh,
sure so that way we can hear you clearly. So
okay.
um let's see here. All right. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Yep. All set. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Well, I was saying that I had never read a comic book in my life, and so I just approached the film from a story and characters that I could relate to because the X-Men, they're all the X-Men sort of an allegory to you know uh, um, the current world in terms of being accepted and prejudices and so forth and misconceptions. But anyway, I didn't know anything about the X-Men except for watching the first X-Men movie, which was the only film with Brian that I wasn't involved with because I was off directing my teen horror masterpiece. uh, so yeah, and so I just approach it that way because I just really, you know, got into what the film was sort of about in the subtext, and it was also just a really good story, and it was a very exciting time for me, of course, because I got to score a big Hollywood movie, and although it was scary as hell, we'll talk about that, I guess, because of doing both those jobs on that film.
Right.
Um, you know, I do. We were just talking about Godzilla and how it's such a good movie because it's gone back to what a film should do first: is write a good script with good stories, and then in using those tropes that every audience wants to see, so they want to keep turning the page of the story. They know where it's going to go. It's like with Star Wars, Luke Skywalker is this far boy, and you know what's ultimately going to save the day in the end of the movie, and you want to wait and see that happen. And I think. Whether it's a superhero film or any film, it's like if you don't have that effort writing the script and have the characters be the central thing that makes you want to turn that page and get you excited, then the film itself, with all the bells and whistles and visual effects and set pieces, it's just going to fall flat. And I think that's what's happening with a lot of films in that sort of universe these days.
Gotcha. And in talking, further about that, and you kind of you jumped ahead there and talking about like what that felt like of going into hopping into this film because you didn't have an opportunity to do the first film, and so like I'm curious by carrying both of those hats because that's not a lot of people if they're not very well versed with film, I will let you know it is not the norm to be able to do
I mean, just
compose
one of those jobs is all
right is
it's so.
enough
And
is
when I
enough.
hear composers complain, like, "Oh my God, they have no life, and how are they going to get through this scoring this movie?" I'm like, "That's all you have to do is score a movie." It's like,
Right.
no,
Right.
but having said that, scoring a film is a gigantic task, and then of course editing is a much bigger task because I don't think people really understand. Most people understand what film editing is. They think it's the removal of things. They don't know the film editor is the architect of the film, and it really, depending on that editor's power or how lazy the director is, is how much that person is really controlling every aspect of the movie. Every department checks in for the editor, from visual effects all the way through sound, whatever. So, anyway, just in a nutshell, editing is sort of a job that doesn't end. So when it crosses over to the scoring phase, it's like I'm still editing the movie, and so that was where it gets brutal. And I was so stressed out. I put a MIDI studio, composing studio, in my editing room, and there was never time to write a note while I was scoring, while I was editing the film, and so it would stress me out looking at it. So I put like a wall, baffles between that and my editing area, because it would just torment me looking at that, knowing I had to write some big score at some point, and how I was going to do it, I had no idea. Um, I still look back and don't know how I did all that. I think it's because I was younger. It's like, you know, um, you basically say goodbye to your friends and family, uh, you live, breathe, and eat. I mean, basically, it's a movie's your life.
Gotcha. And to dig, deeper, into that, idea of taking on that role as composer and taking it on as an editor, I'll hop first on the composing side of it. As I said, like you didn't work on the first film, and sometimes you have that. It's easier to have that experience with the first film because you already kind of have that established foundation in working on a sequel, and now working on a sequel and kind of is you it being your first time working in that in the realm or the franchise of that film. Can you talk a bit about that too? Because I mean, the theme, of course, as much as I love, don't get me wrong, as much as I enjoy the theme that Michael Kamen brought in the first original film, and how it's very grounded and dramatic. Of course, it goes without saying, the bombastic, one that you have, going on, starting in X2 and going forward is also very memorable. So can you talk a bit about that, and bringing that new sound that is, in essence, ended up becoming kind of that official sound of the franchise going forward?
Yeah, well, fortunately for me, there was a trust with Brian Singer and that team because I worked with them on Suspects and I was Pupil and another film we did that no one saw before that. So there was a trust factor. So he sort of, and be, well, let's just say that the scoring process wasn't smooth on X-Men 1, and that was to my advantage in X-Men 2 because then I got to sort of come in and be the guy saying, okay, here's what we have to do. Not that score was bad in any way, it's just that the process was notorious. They still talk about it to this day on the Fox scoring stage because Michael Kamen worked differently than I do. He would ask Brian, well, what do you want? And that's not the way we work together. I would tell Brian, this is what we got to do. And so I think there was, also there was, Brian and I would share this sensibility about the 70s films and the purity of that era of filmmaking and scoring. But I think we have we have that sensibility, but doesn't mean we're literally doing those scores. And I think what happened with Kamen is he told Kamen, we love films in the 70s. And so kind of Kamen went and just did that. And I think that's where the breakdown started happening. Also, didn't Brian have no idea what he was going to hear on stage because there was no mock ups, there was no renderings of what the score was going to be for him to approve beforehand. And so that's just a very insecure place to put a director in. And also, um, he needs to hear things beforehand. So that's where the nightmare began. So when I came in, I'm like, here's what we're gonna do, and here's my rendering, here's what it's gonna sound like, and so everyone can sign off on it. And I liked this theme, but I felt it was incomplete. I felt like there wasn't a second half of it, and I just felt like we needed to pull out the stops and be a little more ballsy with the theme to be more exciting. And I just took the ball and ran with it. I felt a sense of freedom. I didn't feel like, oh my god, because X-Men 1 was such a nightmare behind the scenes. When I walked into it, it was like the seas were parting. Like, oh my God, he's here. John's here because I was part of the original team, and so there was so much trust. I didn't feel freaked out about making decisions and saying what we have to do. You know, I was just freaked out
Gotcha,
about how I was
gotcha.
going to finish it.
Gotcha. And in speaking further to that, you were talking a bit about how fluid that process was in working on the film, and constantly having to be on your toes of changes that came. I'm also curious because I know that there were instances where things were cut, and
Mhm.
as an editor, that provides a challenge because you're deciding on you're helping in that process of deciding what things are going to be cut. But at the same time, if it's something that was originally planned to be a part of the film, I'm curious, where did you have that burden of having music that you were preparing for that given sequence that
Mm.
perhaps never made it into the final cut? Because I know, like, the Danger Room, for example, was going to be a part of, from what I understand,
All
X2. And
right.
like, did you have a theme for that? And then you'll come to find out, oh, we're not using it. Oh crap, okay, I can't,
Right. Well,
like, I
I
already did
didn't.
the theme.
The thing is, with this movie, I didn't write music that early. I did write my suite to the film. I needed to know that I had my themes in order before even editing the movie, even though I couldn't use them because I couldn't score the scenes. There was no time for that. But at least I had my theme figured out, which is that's the biggest agony of figuring those things out. But there wasn't anything I'd scored that was conceived of that we didn't shoot. Um, there was a couple little cues that I wrote that we didn't end up using in the mix because sometimes when you're sitting and mixing the film, you suddenly have a realization like, we don't need music here, so I'm the first one to dump it. I always say, if you don't need film music, don't put it in. Um, so, uh, in other films like Superman, I did score the entire Return to Krypton sequence, which was this. It must have been over 5 minutes long of Superman. The Krypton. escaping from Krypton and so forth, or um, and anyway, so I wrote an entire mock-up for that to be recorded, and then when we decided to cut that from the film, it just remained as a mock-up. Um, but yeah, so that does happen.
And I was gonna also say, like, similarly, something that wasn't didn't, making cut. What if it was something that was, you know, made the change was made as you guys were already in production? Because I do understand, like, there was an instance with the fate of Jean, for example, like that was something that I understand was decided, midway through of what would happen to her, and then,
Right.
coming to that decision of, okay, I already have this, this theme that's prepared. Did it
Well,
just,
well,
as
fortunately, I did. Fortunately, because she is a major player in the film and has a lot of screen time, I did write a theme for her. It's sort of a love theme between her and Logan, and so that was already, you know, figured out. Thank God. So then I just expanded upon it when she died, and it became much more of a bigger thing in the film. Um, I'm remembering now. Just yeah, we did have um, a additional photography we did for the end of the film to have like Xavier in the room with the children and sensing Jean Grey's presence and so forth. And that was not a reshoot, but a new idea we came up with. So I there was no time to it was shot so late in the process, there was no time for me to write music for that scene. So I wrote music just reading script pages. And so they were off shooting in London, and I was in LA just writing what I called music to edit by, and just did a bunch of connectors and things I would envision the scene. And the funny thing is that piece of the score is one of my favorite moments in the whole movie, score wise. Because it just ended up fitting like a glove, and I was so like, "That's so cool!" I wrote this to the script pages, imagining the scene, and I plugged it in, and it worked beautifully. Especially when he looks out the window, there's this very simple harp playing. The harp is simply playing the derivative of Gene's theme, and it just it's one of my favorite moments. Yeah.
awesome, awesome, awesome. So switching gears, then going on to the editing side. There's so many. I feel like people really take for granted how much of a dance it is in terms of, and don't get me wrong, yes, you have choreographers and all of that, but still being able to edit, those the action sequences and how those all work, and then add
Yeah.
the extra added element of the characters having powers and abilities on top of just a regular normal action sequence. um can you talk a bit about those challenges too? Because I feel like Nightcrawler provides an interesting challenge with the teleporting and being
Yeah.
able to show where you are, to make it clear to the audience where they are in a space, because a lot of what is going on in those action sequences is knowing where the characters are and within
Right.
the space. And
It's actually
so
far more complicated than a brain hemorrhage to figure out Blink in Days of Future Past. That portal thing was like confounding at times, trying to figure out, conceive of that, and who's where and who's going through what. But Nightcrawler is pretty straightforward. He just bams out and appears somewhere else. But yeah, the action sequences were basically pretty much prevised, which is for the animated storyboards. So I was very involved in that. Before we start shooting the movie, we conceive of those things and tweak them, and basically it was a lot of huddling together with the second unit director who shot all those scenes, Brian Smurs is his name, and we just were on all those films. We just we really bonded in terms of with the previous team and the two of us coming together and figuring out those sequences, and then. But as it always happens, once you plug in the sequence and shoot the previous verbatim, there's always issues. Things aren't going to work out exactly the way they planned. It doesn't feel right, even though the animated world is different from the real world. So even though you do the exact thing that seems so exciting with the animated version, when you put it together, sometimes it's losing the human element. And so then you got to tweak it and go in and start reshooting stuff. And the White House sequence was a series of a lot of tweaks and going out and shooting more beats just to make it connect together. And then of course musically, that sequence just, I wanted it to be uh, super memorable. And every time I would try to approach it with film scoring, it just would work fine. But it was just another action scene. There was nothing special about it. And so by having this epiphany and using Mozart's Requiem, beefing it up with percussion and so forth, it just gave it this sort of like exciting, but sort of like not because it's classical music, but it makes the theme feel classic, you know. So I think the scene is ageless now because it was using that approach musically.
I want to say, additionally, the other side of that too is, uh, with, and a lot of people take this for granted too, is there's definitely a dance that happens with the rating system too,
Oh
based off
yes,
of what you have with your action too, particularly with Wolverine and with
yeah,
Deathstrike.
that was a
Uh,
super cool, brutal scene where it's having well, there's a lot
right.
more of that to the point where it was like hilarious in terms of like a really like over the top way. It was really, it's really intense. But the ratings board,
Because it's like based on like how long you hold onto the shots or something.
yeah,
Like
I
you
like
cut
that.
it a
And it's
little
with
shorter,
arbitrary.
you could get a PG-13 versus an R rating or something.
Yeah,
Even if there's
they
no
come with
blood, it's so
arbitrary things. They
fascinating.
try to help you out. Like, look, we have to give you notes on this, and so if you do like maybe like five less stabs here, and don't hold on that shot so long or whatever. And so the scene was really pared down a lot. And if you can hear the music, well, most people wouldn't know this, but the music had to be edited, of course, because I'd scored the longer version of the scene. And some of the edits are sort of abrupt because the music was, especially when Wolverine's theme comes in at the end of the scene, it's like was very flowing, and of course it had to be sort of really truncated, as he slams down on top of her. But the scene is still fun. But I always, every time I watch that, remember the original version. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And additionally, with that film, outside of the action, even with the character moments, I know that they're, especially, just with that whole plot of the many of the characters being brainwashed by, the villain. uh can you talk a bit, also about that, and kind of making the decision of, okay, there's enough here that the audience will be able to follow what's happening,
Oh
still get an
well.
arc of the story? Because
Uh,
I'm just saying personally, there are parts overall, like, the if you didn't know about a lot of those additional character moments that were filmed, while it does, don't get me wrong, it adds a lot, it still, works pretty well in terms of still being able to get the overall idea of what's happening. And
yeah.
so can you talk a bit about that, of
Well,
how tricky
yeah.
that is, of trying to figure that out?
Well, obviously it's tricky trying to figure that out, and I'm always a clarity fanatic. I need to have things be logical and clear to the audience, especially for instance, fight scenes. I hate when I see a fight scene. I know who just slugged who. I don't know how person. I know how they slid
Exactly.
over there. What just happened? It's like I'm
Right.
excited to know what's
Right.
going on. And so I'm a stickler for that with action sequences. I need to be able to follow what's happening. The truck chase in Raiders of the Lost Ark is a quintessential example of super clarity, and exactly what's happening, and that's why it's exciting. But anyway, in terms of the cross cutting between reality and non-reality and so forth, it took a while to sort of figure that out in the editing room, and figure out a way where I felt like myself it was clear, but also interesting and enthralling. But there's a funny story about all of that. We had an internal test screening of the cut, just the people involved in the film and the head of the studio, whose name was Tom Rothman, um, and it was this it was this moment where a 13-year-old girl saved X-Men 2, his daughter, because we screened the film and Tom stood up, and Tom was a great guy, but he stood up and he's like, guys, it's like this is way too confusing. No one's going to understand this movie, you know? And so, of course, then we're like freaking out, like, oh my God, that this film's going to collapse, you know? And he looked to his daughter, and I forgot her name, but he goes, you know, so and so, do you know what's going on in this film? And she said, sure, Daddy. And she stood up and she explained the whole movie, the alternate realities, who's doing what, and all the storylines and subtext. And it's like, if she hadn't done that, I don't know what kind of road the film would have gone down. But at that moment, you felt this collective sigh of relief in the theater, and she had saved our lives basically, and she saved the movie. 13-year-old girl, you know.
Very nice, very nice.
Yeah.
So in thinking of just the overall legacy with X-Men, and the reason why I bring up this idea of legacy and just looking back is you know in getting to know you and knowing how much of a perfectionist you are and how you want things to be the way it should be or how you would like them to be. um you know, looking back, obviously, we're looking back now, and it's regarded as one of the best, not only the best superhero sequels in general, but also overall like superhero films, even among the large tapestry of superhero films that we've had. Are there still just things, just you as a perfectionist, like you still look back on it, you're like, oh, I hate that shot, or oh, I hate that I wasn't able to
No,
get a little extra time on this part, or like, oh, I don't like that music key right there, or
I'm trying to
just
remember because it's been so long. I know if I watch it right now, I'd be like, you know, oh fuck, I remember that day. Shit, I wish there was coverage there. You know, um, um, nothing comes off the top of my head, but that's always the case. Yeah, you know. Sorry
yeah.
for that film. I don't have a. I'll probably have it. I'll probably think of that after we're done here. But
Fair enough, fair enough.
but you know, I think the film holds up. It's like you know, I had some friends watch it just recently, and they're like, dude, it's like so good. Like I know it's, I mean, and it's also it's because every department was working. The script was good. You know, obviously the actors were good. The and you had, you know, a good editor composer, and so it's sort of it all came together, and just it's just a strong movie, and there's a heart to it. You know, it's an emotional film, and it feels just grounded in a way, real, and about real things. You know, and I think that's why it resonates. And it's not just emotional because of Gene's death in that main storyline. I'm talking about emotional in terms of, you know, when I see the kids being attacked at school and so forth as a result of politics and prejudice and hate, I get emotional. That's why I scored that scene with action, yes, but there's an underlying sense of tragedy in that music. And so I think that's an emotional scene. And I think the whole movie is that
Absolutely.
way. Um, and so it's like I think that's what sort of sets it apart from a lot of those films.
Absolutely. And also thinking of legacy and thinking back to um uh not just X-Men, but even the X2, you still have that legacy in that you have folks that have worked even way back when on those films, and were working in a smaller capacity then, and now as we're now in the these DC DC films and the MCU, of course, they are have a much bigger role in how a lot of those films are done. And one person that comes to mind immediately for me is Feige, because I know at that time, he was, producing on,
He
those
was
X-Men
Avi
films.
Arad's assistant on X-Men 2. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, he was a producer on on those X-Men films, and now overseeing the whole tapestry of what we have with these MCU films. I know a lot of times he always like revisits you know prior folks or teams that he has worked with. And of course, I have to ask you, man, we have the multiverse happening right now, as I'm sure you well know. um has there been a ask of you as of yet to like, hey, can I
No,
borrow
not at
this
all. I mean,
cue to do
I
this,
would,
or do this because maybe there may be some cross pollinating going on in the near
yeah. I
future.
mean, obviously, I would enjoy going back and, I mean, going forward and scoring, you know, um, something in that universe. I haven't asked. I think I'm
Gotcha.
sort of seen as the old guard, and I think
Well,
there's
no, because I'm saying like if they, with what I understand is happening, I don't know how much maybe you know more than me, but like with like what's happening with the upcoming Deadpool and a couple other
no
films,
idea,
maybe some
frankly.
cross pollinating. So
I
I
haven't
know
really
sometimes you may
been.
ask, "Hey, can I borrow this cue?" So that way, it gives a
Well, I
indication
don't know.
of what came before.
People may not know this, but when you write a score, you don't own your music. You own you.
Oh man,
So you don't own the recording rights to the music. So they can use your music anytime they want, any way they want. They just have to license it from the studio. The studio owns your music. Uh, Unless you go re-record the music, then I would own it because I wrote it. So that's one of my pet projects that I haven't not gotten too far with is going to Europe and recording all of my themes so I can have like a theme album that I own. But anyway, yeah, I would love to do it, but sometimes I feel like even though there's callbacks to X-Men 2 era and so forth, um, I don't know. They think I'm the old fart that would do some sort of like dated score or something. And yet at the same time, they hire Alan Silvestri all the time, and I don't know why I'm asked, but maybe I haven't pressed hard enough. I don't know. Maybe I'm enjoying my
okay.
life too much.
I was gonna say, man, because like I'm sure people will go nuts if they heard your theme score within some of the from what I understand, some of the characters that are returning on a multiversal capacity, to have that theme pop back up as we have those characters introduced
Well, that
with
would be awesome. I
that would
mean,
be,
that
I'm
would make
sure
me
they would
happy
we would
because
have another portal. We would
that's
have
the
another
theme that
portal
is
or
X
something.
Men. God damn it!
I'm gonna put this into the universe. We need to make this happen. We need to make this happen. So if anyone's watching here, you need to hit up John.
Yeah, I mean
Like
that's
we need
why I
to have
was
this
very
thing back.
adamant on Days of Your Past to use the theme again to jazz people up, and I had the support of the studio. Fortunately, otherwise it would have been a challenge to do the whole same opening, with the preamble and then into the theme, and then I did the same thing with Apocalypse because I feel like it's like a James Bond film. You have to start out the same way every time because that's what gets people excited. There needs to be a cohesiveness between the movie, among the movies, with the same theme. It's the same thread. So it is irritating when there's other films that sort of make a departure or something. It's another theme, and then you go back, and I'm like, no, goddamn, we're going to put my theme back, and this is the theme X Men, you know. So it is really gratifying if they do use my version because then I feel like they're saying that theme is what represents X Men. We'll see.
Exactly. Exactly.
We'll see. We'll see. You never know what'll happen. I'm sure it'll be something horrible.
But with that being said, John, thank you so much for
Oh,
hopping
sure.
on a Saturday.
It got me up.
On the last few days, as I said, of the year. What can you tell folks what else you have going, or tease what folks
No,
can expect? Like, are you coming back to the Star Trek? Can you at least say that? Like, are
no,
you?
no. I mean,
No.
they have their pool of directors that they work with, and I I came in. It was a favor that Alex Kurtzman had asked me to work behind the scenes on one of the seasons, and so it was a favor he gave me an episode. But so I don't have any of that in the works. I just have a lot of projects as director that I'm developing, and which may or may not go. I'm realistic about it, but that's my aim is to direct something that I care about. Otherwise, I'd just rather go on a cruise, enjoy my life. So it has to be something that gets me out of bed that I'm passionate about. Otherwise, why do it? So that's what I'm doing now. I have many pots in the fire that keep me busy, and reworking scripts here and there, trying to get things off the ground. Yeah.
All right, cool beans. So again, I want to thank John for hopping on this morning for those of you that are on his end on the West Coast, and of course this afternoon for those on my end. Can you tell folks where they can find you, John, before I let you go? I don't, maybe
Well,
you're
there's
not.
a problem with my website. It's down because of some domain problem, and so basically, I don't exist online right now. So we're trying to figure out a way to resurrect my website. So, unfortunately, until that's resurrected, there's no way. But I'll let you know, and then you can let people know once that's back up and running.
All right, sounds good.
Uh,
Well, there you guys
I
have
mean,
it.
it was www.ottman.com, but nothing's going to come up. It's going to be just dead space. So,
Gotcha, gotcha,
okay.
gotcha. Well, there you guys have it again. Thanks to John Ottman. Talking 20 years, man, 20 years of X2. uh, I'm your host, Brandon Choi, host and co-creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be safe
And
out
watch the film in 4K. It's supposed to be amazing.
and
So,
4K. There you go.
yeah.
Watching in 4K. But again, if I don't see you guys, happy New Year. Happy New Year to you, John.
Happy New
Early New
Year.
Year. And till next time, guys.
All
See you
right.
soon.